Growing up, I very quickly learned that I was different than most of my peers. And to some of you, that you're going to chuckle, you think that's funny. Of course, I'm different. But there's some very specific ways that I was different than my peers. My parents were married to each other, and my siblings were my full siblings. They were not half or step siblings. All four of my grandparents were still alive. I even had a great grandmother still living. Now, she died my sophomore year in high school. When I was about 8 years old, I think, I learned that I actually had another grandmother because my dad's mom passed away when he was 7. And the person I called grandma was his second mom. So I learned I had a bonus grandmother, but I learned this through a sermon. So it was not the best situation. If you're a preacher's kid, you get that real quick, that you learn something in a sermon about a big event. It was a big deal. And I learned I had another grandmother that way. My grandpa died a few weeks after I graduated from college. And my grandma, my dad's second mom, died in June 2015, not long after we moved to Plainview. And as I mentioned, July 31st is the day Grandmama passed away. Now, I loved each of these people deeply, but my relationship with her was extra special. She was more than just a grandmother to me. She was a friend and a mentor. She was always in my corner, supporting and praying for me. So the last couple of weeks have been filled with a great range of emotions and memories. But before I get to those, I want to share a little bit more about this amazing woman who shaped my life in every way because she constantly reached up and out. My grandmother did not grow up in the church. At some point, she went to a VBS and was given a little Bible. I remember her telling me that. She went to a VBS where she learned the chorus of Bringing in the Sheaves in Chinese. And she could still sing it up until a few years ago. She still remembered the words. But that little Bible is where she started. She started with searching the scriptures in that little Bible. And I'm guessing she found a bigger one at some point because she was going to every congregation in town looking for the truth. And going by herself because her parents didn't go. She knew what the Bible said, and every place she went, she said, they're missing something. They're missing something. They're missing something. So she landed on one church, and she said, well, this is close. It's still not quite it. She met my grandfather when they were 16 years old. She was actually dating his friend at the time. And he decided that would not do. And he stole her away from his friend. And I've actually got a whole post about that right there that you can read all those details. And that post is about, it's close to 10 years old. Not quite, but close. So there's more people than is in that post. But when they began dating, she started going to church with him and his family and found that missing piece. One Wednesday night, my grandfather was working, and she decided right then that she was going to answer the gospel call. She went to services without him and was baptized without him because she didn't do it for him, and she didn't do it for his parents. She did it for herself. She did it because her only audience was the Creator and the Savior. And she lived that faith every day of her life. She continued to read and study her Bible. She taught her children, her grandchildren, and even her great-grandchildren through both words and actions. My grandparents were married 2 days before her 18th birthday. She told my grandfather they could either get married before her birthday or after his, which was in July. Because at that time, they published ages in the newspaper, and she didn't want it to look like she was older than him. And because they were only 17, they were too young to get married, and they had to have somebody sign for them. And she also told my grandfather that she wanted to have 4 children by the time she was 25. She got her way on that too. She taught Sunday school, led Bible studies, and managed her home. She was an Avon lady, and she was a bookkeeper, even without a formal education. Now, on 2 occasions, my family lived with my grandparents between my dad's preaching jobs. One of these times, I would actually learn years later, my grandfather was also unemployed. So it was truly inconvenient for them to take on my family of 5 and themselves. And it was during this stay that I decided to follow the gospel. My grandparents and parents and the couple that my grandparents had been studying with were all present when I put on Christ in baptism. That next day, she asked if it felt as though I'd been walking on air all day. After I said yes, she said I felt that too. We never had to wonder what she was thinking about anything, whether it was politics or somebody down the street or another member of the family. You never had to wonder what she thought. She shared her pride in us as well as her disappointments. She encouraged and supported us and prayed for us daily. She could crochet, cross stitch, and sew. She made numerous baby afghans and quilts. One of her cross-stitch projects was a Parliament of Owls with the caption, "There's always room for one more." So at the time she made this, there were only 7 grandchildren. So there were 2 big owls, which were Grandmama and Granddaddy, and then there were 7 smaller owls of various sizes. But within a year and a half, 2 grandchildren had been added to that, fulfilling that there's always room for one more. She never went back and added the other owls, though. But this sentiment didn't only apply to grandkids. Everyone was welcome at my grandmother's house. On more than one occasion, one of my dad's siblings would come to a family event. My uncle's mother spent several holidays with us after she moved in with my aunt and uncle due to her Alzheimer's. Our friends growing up, all of our friends when we were growing up were welcome. And she actually had started this with her own kids, who brought home extras while they were at college or strays who had nowhere else to go. And she taught hospitality just by living it. In my senior year of high school, my grandmother was diagnosed with colon cancer. Through a colostomy, the doctors cleared out all the cancer and she didn't even need chemo or radiation. After the recommended time, she had that colostomy successfully reversed. When she was 80, she had a hysterectomy due to uterine cancer. And I think she made some silly comment about not needing it anyway, because, she was 80. But again, she needed no additional treatment. She kicked cancer twice. She did have other complications over the years from the scar tissue, but she didn't let it stop her. She even ended up spending part of one vacation where they went to go visit my grandfather's brother and sister-in-law in the hospital because some of those adhesions had decided to act up. That time with the family was more important to her than her own discomfort. During the summers of my college years, while I went to graduate school, I lived with my grandparents and worked for my grandfather's company. One of those years, I attended a quilt class with her. Each month, we made a new quilt block, and by the end of the year, we had a quilt. Well, I had all 12 quilt blocks. She finished my quilt for me and surprised me with both a visit and the finished quilt on my birthday in 2011, with a trip up to Colorado Springs. Every day, when my grandfather and I came home from work, the table was set and supper was ready. And I knew, watching this, that that's what I wanted to do for my own family. My grandmother's heart ached with mine when I struggled with my job at the children's home. I knew she was praying for the man I would one day marry before we knew who it would be. She knew how deeply I wanted a family of my own. When that man turned out to be a soldier, she was both proud and concerned. She put yellow ribbons up on all the trees and my parents' tree. And when I say she, I mean Granddaddy. She added Peter to the bulletin board of service members at their congregation. My mother told me this past week that Grandmama always felt like I got a rotten deal because of all the deployments and separations. But I hope she knew how much her presence meant to me during those times. During that first deployment, we lived in Colorado Springs. I was pregnant with Dietrich, and collectively, all of us, including Peter, decided I should stay with my parents for the last trimester. A lot of things happened during that time The biggest one of which was my dad was diagnosed with and treated for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is now in full remission. My grandmother came for his first treatment and at least one other to stay with me, just in case. She was there when my baby boy was born. She rode back to Colorado Springs with me when Dietrich was 3 months old and then flew back home, just so I didn't have to make the trip by myself. Even when we moved to Germany, my grandparents planned a trip to see us. In fact, the longest I've ever gone without seeing them happened because of 2020. My grandparents' visit to Germany was roughly halfway through our time there. And so when I calculated it up, the longest I had not seen them was because of the year 2020. When we moved back to the States and ended up in Plainview, we were just a few miles from where my grandparents met and kind of in the middle of where each of them were born. And she was so excited because I'd always wanted to come back to this area and do more here again. The last surprise visit they made out here was in April of 2016, before her back surgery that didn't go as smoothly as planned. And even with all the issues that followed, she continued to work on her quilts and scrapbooks, even though it became less and less at a time. She finished all the grandkids' books and was working through the great-grands when she couldn't do any more sometime last year. And when I say scrapbooking, I don't mean putting pictures in an album and putting a few names and dates. I mean our lives are thoroughly documented. Family history. It's all there. It's all there. And I have 5 of these books that document my life. She took great care to know what was going on in our lives, showed interest in our activities, and knew our friends' names. She loved our friends just because we did. She offered wisdom from the Bible, insight from experience, and unwavering support. Her prayers never faltered. Even when she was in great pain, she held on to her hope. My grandmother knew hardship. Growing up, her family was poor, and she remembered times when food was scarce. But she knew how to fend for herself and do what needed to be done without being asked. She made a choice to walk with Christ and did not look back. She looked for ways to reach up to God for answers and then reached out to others with all she could offer, even if that wasn't much. My grandmother was present for every major milestone in my life. My baptism, high school, college, and graduate school graduations, my wedding, the birth of my firstborn. She told me my babies were really hers, but she would let me raise them. I have the suspicion she told even her own children this when they had her grandchildren. And I know she told all my cousins and siblings the same thing. She never hesitated to let me know I was doing an amazing job. And her encouragement always came at just the right time. Earlier this week, I looked through my messages and emails and found several of her notes of encouragement. I looked through numerous pictures, but like I said, I haven't been able to look through my scrapbooks yet. And I want to share a few of these encouraging words with you. You are all three constantly on our minds and in our prayers. Let me know when I need to put the ribbons on the trees. There will be 3 in our front yard, 1 for each of you. We are praying for Peter's safety. Just know that we love you all so very much. Angie, Peter, and Dietrich, we had a special prayer at church this morning for all of you. You've been added to the list of military members serving our country, and we prayed for. Our last song this morning was God Bless You, Go With God, and I sang it with thoughts of you in my heart. Peter, this will be hard for you, but you are strong and courageous. Just hold fast to your faith and be as happy as you possibly can be. Angie, you have that precious little one to keep you company and help fill your time. It won't be long till you'll all be reunited again. In the meantime, just know you have a lot of people in your corner who love and support you. Let us know if there's anything we can do. Love always, Grandmama. In one message, she had invited me to stay with them and added, I just hope you know how loved and appreciated you are, and we would like to make things easy for you while you wait for Peter's return. Whatever decision you make, we are there in full support of you. When I had my miscarriage, I could only call my mom. That's the only words I could get out. And she later that evening called Grandmama for me. And Grandmama sent me an email that said, Granddaddy and I are so sad for your loss. and hope you can find the strength to carry you through. Your mother called us last night just before we were about to leave for church. I sent an email to the family this morning to let them know. There is one big, huge comfort for you in that we will meet this sweet baby in heaven. She took that burden of sharing the most difficult news of my life. I like to think she's holding my baby now. My grandmother used various psalms for different ones of her passwords because she loved the words of God. I think she had a special love for the psalms. And one of them was Psalm 133. Verse 1 of that psalm says, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." I believe this was also her prayer for her family. Like all families, we have those who've wavered, but she died believing they would return to their faith. I am deeply sad because Grandmama's presence in my life was so big. I'm immeasurably grateful for the many years and memories that my children got to know her as well. I'm angry that the events of 2020 stole valuable time from us. I am so relieved that she is free from pain and suffering. Yet more than all of those feelings, I am overwhelmed by the example of God's love that she poured out every day of her life. Her legacy is one that clings to hope, always reaching up to the Father and out to his people. Years ago, I wrote a blog post for my MOPS group in Germany about living in God's promises. It is only in his promises that we can walk through the fires and come out unscathed. Dwelling in the Word is the only way to have an abundant life. When we trust in the Lord, he takes care of the details. And I'm going to share what I wrote with you. And you can also read it there. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and the Lord will deliver you. The troubles you have today, you will never have again. The Lord will fight for you if you will only be still. Exodus 14:14. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. No matter what you face, I go before you. You are mine because I rescued you. Isaiah 43. I will give you the victory if you follow me. You have no reason to fear because I am walking in front of you and I will never leave you. Deuteronomy 32:5-7. I alone can take all the bad things in your life and turn them into something good beyond your imagination. You will conquer any obstacle when you trust in me. And when you remain faithful, nothing, that is, no thing, will separate you from my love. When I am with you, the enemy is powerless. Romans 8:28-39. Don't you know that I am the Lord? I do not sleep. No problem is too great for me. I understand all you are going through, and I can give you the strength so that you will soar like an eagle. Isaiah 40:28-31. My grandmother lived these promises, and I am so grateful for that example.